Welcome to the Transformative Principal podcast. This is your host, Eric McKelkey. Our guest on the show today, welcome, Mr. Johnathan Cranford. How are you this morning?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. Love your show.
Yeah, thanks for coming on today. Really excited when we first connected with Jethro through email, that the topic you wanted to come on the show about was ISS.
That is correct.
Yeah.
In-school suspension.
Yeah, I double checked. I don't know if you get that a lot. I'm like, you mean in-school suspension, right?
Yes, not the International Space Station.
Yeah. Yeah, if your audience is principals, that's what we think, but I don't know that non-educators are as excited about those three letters as we are. So I think it's a really unique topic, but very relevant, and that's why I was pretty tired last night. My wife's like, "Why don't you sleep in?" I said, "No, I got an early podcast episode, and I'm really excited." And she's like, "Oh, cool. You know what?" And she's thinking like research. She's into curriculum. I said, "No, we are talking ISS on the podcast." So, really excited. So Johnathan, tell us a little bit. Where's your background coming from before we get into the ISS conversation?
Yeah, well, thanks for not sleeping in, first off. I appreciate it. And my background is I started teaching 11 years ago, and my first 7 years of teaching, I was a high school English teacher on a therapeutic campus for students with the label of emotional disturbance. And then I went from that into teaching in-school suspension on a standard middle school campus. And that's what I've done the last 4 years on 2 middle school campuses. And I think the most important thing for your audience to know about me is that my wife is also a school teacher, and my daughter is also a school teacher. And pretty much all of my friends are school teachers. So the way I view my role in school suspension is to support the people I'm closest with. I always ask, like, how can I be a value add to this campus? And how can I help these folks who I care about, who are doing the most difficult job in the world, which is, of course, teaching middle school. So let me just tell you kind of how I got to where I am, and then we can go into writing the book. So my first year as a in-school suspension teacher on a middle school, they just, there's no real training for becoming an in-school suspension teacher. There's no PLCs. There are now in my district, fortunately. We made that happen.
Can I clarify that? So you get to collaborate with other in-school suspension teachers?
Yes, we do.
Man, that's awesome. I guess being in a huge district, you're not just on an island like in a small rural place.
Well, there wasn't PLCs until I started doing what I'm doing. But yeah, I am in the PLCs. Often I'm leading the PLCs, and it's good. We're getting some. Everybody's starting to get on the same page, and we've got 12 middle schools and 5 high schools. So, getting the system to work is it's starting to happen, but just internally now. Where was I? Right. So I go into in-school suspension, and like I said, there was no PLCs, there was no training. They just kind of throw you in there, and they're like, "Hey, good luck. Do your best." And so I instantly just start implementing some rules and procedures that are pretty common sense to me. And almost immediately, what happens is my campus starts to notice. They start to feel it, and I have teachers coming up to me in the hallways. And they're asking me, like, "Hey, my kid got all of his assignments completed. That's, how did that happen? Or he's doing more with you than he got done all week, with me. How do you get them to do their work? Question mark." I'm like, "Okay, oh, is that new?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's new." And then, I'm hearing them say things like, "Well, wow, the kids are having different conversations about in-school suspension now. Like, they don't want to go back there at all. Like, they never want to go back, but they're also saying, like, they don't hate you. They're like, 'Oh, Mr. Cranford's cool, but ISS sucks. I don't want to go back.'" That's their standard statement. So I realized pretty much immediately that we're having an effect that's positive as far as the behavior intervention is there. It is a consequence, at least at this point. It's functioning as a consequence, and they're not losing. They're oftentimes getting ahead or getting caught up on academically. They're not losing instruction. So we're already kind of where we want to be, and it's going to become much more than that. But that was just year one. That was me just figuring things out. By year two, my district starts to notice. And what they do is they start using my room as a model ISS room, and they're bringing in behavior specialists and other people from the district to come in and look. And eventually they bring in even another district that they're mentoring on PBIS implementation. And, I'm getting attention that my classroom, I've never received in all my years of teaching, my classroom is now getting all of this attention all of a sudden. So I start asking some questions, right? I'm like, are there other similar ISS rooms in the district? And they tell me, well, no one's doing what you're doing. And so I kind of do the math in my head. Well, there's 12 middle schools, 5 high schools, nobody. And so then I start talking to teachers in other districts, right? So I'm in the Houston area. I'm not in Houston Independent School District, but I'm sure you've heard of it. It's one of the largest in the country. But
Yep.
we border it, and we border a bunch of other medium-sized districts, so all around me. And I know teachers who work in all of them. And so I asked those teachers, hey, what's ISS like, on your campus? What's it like over there? And you get two responses. The most common is ISS is a joke. The kids love going there. There's nothing happening. It just kind of gives the teacher a break. They just dump the kid in there. And then, or you'll hear, well, yeah, I think our ISS teacher is good. But then when you do a little digging and you start asking questions like, oh, well, what's your system for getting work to this person? Or does work, come back completed? And you'll get, oh, well, no, we don't really expect work to come back, but, he makes them sit there quietly all day. And, so that's good. And that to me it's not functioning. That's just kids sitting in a room doing time. So then that piques my interest even more. So I start doing a little digging on the internet. And I'm a bit of a writer as a hobby, you could say, and you're not going to keep a writer away from a story. So I get into Google and start looking around, and I find that everywhere in the United States right now is struggling with this problem of having this a tier 2 intervention, right? When you have exclusionary discipline, OSS or ISS, and if you look at the data, they're paired together as equally ineffective, right? If you send a kid out of school, you send them home for a couple of days, nothing good really comes of that. We know that now. The data shows that. But ISS, it's also showing that as well, that it's right there with OSS as far as it being effective. But I've already figured out why, right? In my head, I know why. I'm like, oh, well, the bar has been set incredibly low for this position, and it's not effective. And part of the reason it's not effective is they just don't know how to do it. They haven't figured out a way to implement it, this plan. So that realization just motivates me to go ahead and start writing, because I look on Amazon. I'm like, is there any books that out there that are saying, here's how to run an ISS program efficiently, properly, effectively? And there's not. There's books kind of ISS adjacent. There's books saying why you shouldn't have ISS, and I understand all that, but there's not one that until now that says, here's how you do it, and here's how it can work for you.
Yeah, and that's important. There's some philosophical stuff on effectiveness and, personal opinions, and that's great. The book on Amazon, A Discipline Program That Benefits Your Staff and Students, is a subtitle, but I just pulled up The Art of In-School Suspension is the title, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's great, because I know a lot of, going back to when you first came into the ISS role, probably not a lot of mentorship, and here we're going to help you set this program up for success. If I had to guess, it was, here's the keys, here's the room, do your best.
That you just described exactly what the experience was. Yeah.
Here's the other thing. I wonder about this. Your first year, even your first day in that role on that campus, what did you hear from like the teacher side of, hey, welcome, you're the ISS guy, make sure when they come to you, I wanted to do this, versus your administrators? Like, what were the expectations of you being the ISS guy? What did people want?
They want the like I said, the bar is very low. They wanted, 10 kids to go into the room and 10 kids to come out at the end of the day with minimal bruises and scratches and injuries. I feel like that's where it was, to be honest. We had an effective system pretty quickly on how to send work to in-school suspension. But the teachers were so used to not getting work back, they were sending it into essentially a black hole where it would never return. So I immediately, jumped on that and was like, no, 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 we're going to get the work back to you. So yeah, as I said before, the expectation was very low. The bar was low, but once I started getting them their assignments back to them completed, I started getting kids caught up on things. Then they started to see the value. The teachers see it almost immediately. It takes a little while longer for the admin to jump on board, because there's a little bit of a distance between what the teachers are seeing and what they're seeing, right? So it takes them a little bit of time.
Well, and if I had to guess, the more effective the ISS room is, and you have that program structured effectively, you're going to probably get more clients from the administrators, right?
Yeah, well, yes, the admin, if you're referring to people who send the children to in-school suspension.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like when we have discipline issues in the principal's office, and you look at, I don't know what your guys' discipline code and handbook looks like, but there's usually discretion unless it's a major safety issue, like, hey, this could be in school or out of school. Well, everybody knows as a principal, you don't control outside school suspension, right? Some
Right.
kids, you hear, that old school, Johnny will be pulling weeds for 3 days and drink no water in the sun. Like, I am going to support you, and he will never want out of school suspension. And then you have some that say, I'm taking him to Disneyland, and you're picking on my kid, and this is going to be a vacation. It's like, well, that's not effective. So it's like, if the ISS program is set up doing what we want, kids completing work getting turned in, they're not falling further behind academically, and maybe they're learning some like pro-social behaviors, everybody would rather have the student in ISS instead of a ticket out the door.
Yeah, that is. So when you were asking me, I don't think I wasn't clear exactly on the question when you asked where am I getting my clients from
Yeah,
in my school, and I think in all the schools in my district, the only people who can assign in school suspension is the administrators.
yeah,
So they don't really they can be referred by the teachers, but the admin are the ones who send them to me. But yeah, one of the things that's a new experience I just this is just this year I heard this. I always get pretty high praise from my administrators on what I'm doing, but I had an administrator recently stop me in the cafeteria, and we were discussing just what was going on in school suspension that the last couple of weeks, and he had said to me, I didn't even think about this, but it's to your point. I never thought of this, that he was like, no, he's like, you've helped me out so much, because now when I'm telling a parent that I'm assigning in-school suspension, they try to argue, well, why should I put this kid in school suspension? He's just going to miss instruction. And he's like, I can just say, no, 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 this guy that we have here actually gets them caught up on their work. And so it really helps them. And that's not why I am passionate about in-school suspension. I'm really more from the teacher angle. I'm helping out teachers, right? That's most of what I think of. I don't honestly, I don't think about administrators a lot, other than, are they sending me kids? Is it, how is that going? Why are they sending them? Am I, do they appreciate what I'm doing? But yeah, so I didn't even realize how much that could benefit until this year, how much that benefits you guys in just being able to tell a parent, look, they're not going to be behind on instruction. This is a perfectly good intervention, and it's better than sending them home for 3 days.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it's the only way to have some kind of control over that as a school, is to make sure they have, the opportunity to stay as caught up as they can, and hopefully not repeat the same mistakes. Can you tell me a little bit, you had mentioned when we were emailing back and forth, Johnathan, ISS is your passion project. How did you end up really going all in on ISS and wanting to really help schools and write a book and start consulting and offer to train. How did ISS become your passion?
Well, I mean, the first year initially, I don't think it was my passion. I realized saying that IS in-school suspension is my passion makes me sound like a weirdo. But once I started getting some success and seeing what the possibilities were, I started to think of it from the teacher's perspective. And if you think of it this way, say you're a school teacher and, you have some misbehaviors in your classroom that are kind of blowing up. And now you go through this whole process of making a referral, which includes trying your own behavior interventions in class. Then you have to contact a parent,
Mm-hmm.
right, before you can send a referral. Then you send the referral. Then the referral has to go through an administrator who has to spend their time and then also contact a parent to inform them of, what the consequence is going to be. And then they send a kid to in-school suspension. And now they come back to your room, your classroom, not having received any kind of intervention, and now also 1 to 3 days behind an instruction. Like that to me cannot happen. I just, I can't live that way, and I can't let my teachers live that way. So that's where I started to become more passionate about it. I was like, look, no, I'm going to go beyond for you guys and show, and it's not hard. Like people think I'm working really hard. There's some misconceptions. For one, people think I'm in there. I'm not, I'm doing something that's really fun that my other teachers don't get to do, which is spend a lot of time working one-on-one with kids. I get an eternity to work one-on-one with my learners. So I get sometimes more one-on-one time than a teacher gets with a student all year. I've worked for 3 hours side by side with one kid, just filling gaps, going over skills that they were supposed to have learned in 5th grade and 6th grade, and they didn't. And so we go and close those gaps after we've gotten all their regular schoolwork done. And then the other misconception is that I deal with a lot of behaviors, and I simply don't. I have it set up to where we know what the consequence and we know what the response is going to be to pretty much every behavior that you can imagine in ISS. So I don't really have to deal with a lot of that stuff. But what I can do is go beyond and get these teachers some help. And I'll give you an example. So 7th grade last semester, right at the end of the semester, we're going over Pythagorean theorem, and it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? So I work with a kid on doing a squared, teaching him the Pythagorean theorem, and they give you, a and B a lot of the time, and then you have to figure out C. But sometimes they give you A and C, and now you have a 2-step equation, right? So you have to do a little bit of algebra. Well, I find out the child doesn't have that skill. So then we go back and we learn that skill. And in the process of learning that skill, we learned that they don't know how to divide decimals. So then we go back and we fill that gap. And it's very easy when you're working one-on-one with a kid to go and give them some supports that they didn't have. And you've got time to do it quite often. So now I'm sending them back to the classroom, not only caught up on their work, but we've also filled in some gaps that they needed. So now they're probably going to be a little bit better student because they're a little bit more engaged. And another thing that I do with kids now is, and I didn't do this in my 1st and 2nd year, but I am now in my 3rd and 4th year doing this. I'll go and look in their, you guys use Schoology or Google Classroom?
Mm-hmm. An SIS or LMS, like a learning management system. Yeah.
Right. So I'll go in there and I'll be like, oh, look, you're failing social studies. Well, let's look at these grades. And, maybe they've got some 30s and 40s in there. So I'll just contact the teacher and say, hey, can we reopen this so we can do this and get this done and get this grade up? And so a lot of times my kids, they're caught up, and now they're also passing when they go back to the teacher. So, and then I can have those conversations with them of like, okay, so do we want to keep this going now, right? Do you want to stay on top of this a little bit more? I'm not asking you to now be, this, work as, much harder than you were already. I'm just asking you to work a little bit harder than you were before. Try to stay on top of things a little bit more, and things will be easier. And that's when you start to see some of those behaviors changing in the classroom, making the lives of the teachers a little bit easier, which speaks to teacher retention, because I know that's a big issue right now. If you can cut down on the behaviors, help the teachers out, take something off of their plate, fill some gaps for them, all the things that you can do that you have the freedom to do in an in-school suspension room, and even get some SEL in, or some, restorative stuff done at the end of the day when it's, when they're primed for it, then, you've done a lot for that teacher, for all of those, for that one student's teachers, all of them, all 8 of them or whatever. So that's how I became passionate about it, because I see the value of what it is. And now I'm on these shows trying to get everyone else to see the value so that we can deal with this tier 2 issue. Because right now, if you look at, you had a person on your podcast, just it aired a few podcasts ago, or a few episodes ago, talking about getting teachers, classroom management prepared before they actually more training on classroom management before they actually get to the classroom, right? Because the reason they're leaving is they don't have the classroom management skills. They're finding out that they can't teach because there's too many behaviors, and that's very frustrating. And then when they go to admin for a solution, well, nobody has a tier 2 solution, right? We have plenty of tier 1, all that stuff that they get. That's what everybody gets. Then when it gets to tier 2, their solution is OSS and ISS, and neither of those are effective. So now you get people feeling like they don't have a solution, feeling like their admin doesn't have a solution. That causes tension. It causes people to want to leave, sadly, because the job is hard enough without, like I said, going through that whole process of sending a kid, yeah, you got to break from for 3 days, but now they come back and it's more work to get them caught up. So that's why I'm passionate about it, to answer your question. I hope I didn't drone on too long.
No, you're good. I mean, you and I were talking a little bit before we started recording about, in your words, the bar was low when you started. But if I'm hearing you right, it's like, yeah, but we could raise the bar and this could help kids academically and help teachers feel supported and help kids want to make better choices. And it's like that is really, really powerful and can have a big positive impact on not just a kid or a teacher, but a whole school. Having an ISS program that, is effective. And that's why I'm no expert on ISS, but why it's so intriguing. Just the topic is like, wow, we could make ISS a lot more effective. I bet a lot of schools, unless they have a guy like you who's jumping in, which, a lot of people, when they end up in that role, you hear, hey, I'm trying to get into a teaching position. So I took a job in the district as an ISS coordinator and I'm waiting for an opening. It's sometimes a role where I always think about, if you are lucky enough to have a position or funding for it, is like, well, you got to really have some certain personality traits and characteristics when you're trying to hire an ISS teacher. You see some of the situations where, and I wanted to ask you this question, Johnathan, when kids come to you as the ISS teacher, how do you balance, having structure and high expectations, which you really need in that setting, but also trying to build a little bit of a relationship with the kid when they're in the program? How do you balance between, I'm swinging the big stick and, hey, let's go shoot some hoops. I'm your best friend. ISS is fun. I'm the cool guy. How do you balance that?
Right. Well, I'm never the cool guy, and I don't need a 12-year-old friend. So I don't look at it that way, but I do care about my kids. And this is how it works. I have a chapter in the book called Win the Morning, Win the Day. So I lay everything out fairly clearly in the morning of how everything is going to go. And I spent about 20 minutes just talking with them, or talking to them essentially, and laying out, this is our procedure for everything. This is how we go to lunch. This is how we line up for the restroom. This is when your restroom break is going to happen. This is what you're going to do when you finish an assignment. You're going to raise your hand. You're going to bring it to me. I'm going to check it. I keep track of, all of these things that are happening in my room. And they know. So there's no surprises in my in-school suspension room. But then what I do is there's one thing I do that I think gives them a little bit of, one thing that gives them a little bit of self-efficacy, which I think is valuable, is I have my own seating chart where I also track behaviors and documentation, but I track work. So I can have, first period, if a kid wants to work on ELA, excuse me, it's early in the morning.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get some water. So if I have, like, say a kid wants to work ELA first thing in the morning, well, then that's fine. And another kid wants to work math, that's fine, because I can track all of that and let it all go on at the same time. And I let them know, I'm like, hey, we're going to do core content first, but you choose the order of how you want to tackle this. So they have some self-efficacy right off the bat. I show them respect and letting them know, like, I'm not going to assign busy work in here unless you earn it. There's no busy work. in my in-school suspension room. There is assignments, and that is it. We complete all of our assignments. Your life is going to get easier in here. I'm not going to let you watch video games and play YouTube, or play video games and watch YouTube, but I'm going to, I'll give you some things that we can do to pass the time, but we're not going to, it's not going to be fun. But when you do finish all of your assignments and, make sure you're passing everything, and, we've gone through, if we don't have any gaps to close, then, your life in here is just going to be, a little bit smoother and easier. So they have that right off the bat. They have my respect. They know they have that. They know that they have some choice in the matter. And then they're going to see my willingness to work with them and help them achieve something. And what it all comes back to is nurturing, essentially. Like, I am nurturing in my ISS room these children, and nurturing, as an adult, I now understand its meaning. And it is not, hey, I'm going to hold your hand and play basketball with you and be your best friend. And I'm going to let a lot of things go. What it is, hey, I am not going to allow any of these behaviors in this classroom, but that's not going to matter to you, because there is so much willingness to help you achieve something today, to be here, to work with you, that stuff's just not going to matter to you, because we're going to build some momentum. We're going to get some things done. And at the end of the day, you're going to feel good about it.
Do you hear that at the end of the day when they're walking out? What do you like thinking about a student who maybe it's their first trip or their first, in-school suspension ever? End of the day, what do you hear from those kids walking out?
Yeah, a lot of times they're happy. They're like, oh yeah, I got caught up on all my work. I feel good, and we want to build on that momentum. The tier ones that come in for the first time, and usually their last time, I call them, that's still a tier one, even though they got a tier two intervention. They made an impulse buy and skipped a class or something stupid. It's just, they're not going to be back. They get in trouble once a year. They're not that level of behavior. Mm-hmm. So, for them, it's usually just, there's not a lot that, they don't need a lot of redirection, and they have a pretty okay day in ISS, and it's actually not that bad. And they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Now, another type of student, if you have a tier, and I hate to put them in categories, people are not tier one, tier two. They kind of, they fluctuate depending on what's going on in their lives. But if you have those tier two type students who get in a lot of, repeat customers to ISS, then one thing you need to know is, one day in there isn't so bad, but 3 days is brutal.
Yeah.
By day two, the newness of it has worn off, and all we do in here is work, right, for the most part. And we do some SEL stuff at the end of the day, and that's nice. That gives them a little bit of a break, but that is out the very end of the day. And I put it there for a very specific reason. You'll have to read about that in the book. Or we can get into it here if we have time. But yeah, so a 3 day versus a 1 day is different. When you get those repeat kids in there, what you're trying to do oftentimes, especially with a tier two kid, especially the junior high level, when a lot of times it's not a skill issue. Like, we know if they can tell me on a behavior reflection sheet that they know what they should have done in X situation, then we know it's not a skill issue. This is just an issue of they're making choices because of they're used to, it's getting them what they want. It's been serving them up to this point, and so they're going to keep on doing it. And so what my goal is now is to get them to associate the behavior with the consequence.
So Johnathan, what you had me thinking about when we were talking associating the behavior with the consequence on the student's end, I always worry a little bit that you have some students that choose to act out in classroom or in the milieu because they really deep down would rather be in ISS. It's safer. They learn more. They don't have the social pressure that they feel in, classrooms, lunchrooms. Do you ever find that students will kind of step on that line on purpose because they would rather learn in your program in the ISS room?
You're right. Well, we don't have very many who prefer to be in ISS. The only children I've seen who actually really kind of have expressed that they like ISS better than regular school is my high functioning ASD kids that are on the spectrum. Like, there's a few of those I've had who would just rather be in the quiet, away from everybody else, and they do okay in school suspension. But I haven't had anybody who's intentionally trying to come in that room. not in 4 years anyway.
Gotcha. If you were gonna start an ISS program or restart an ISS program, what would you recommend schools do as the first step? Like, hey, to really get ISS heading in the right direction, this is the key. This is the foundation you got to lay. What would you tell us?
Well, the first thing you want is you want an educator in the room. You don't want a babysitter. So someone who is actually feels like they're an educator, they're a classroom teacher, preferably, and you don't necessarily have to be a classroom teacher to be a good in-school suspension teacher. I think it really helps, and that's what we should shoot for. But somebody who sees themselves as an educator and who's passionate about working with kids, not just someone who wants to sit there and do what the kids are doing on their, school-issued laptops or phones or whatever. And then you just need to implement what I call infrastructure, which is the setup of the room, the physical layout. For us, we have a digital and a physical infrastructure. The digital is how we get work to the in-school suspension teacher. For myself, that is a spreadsheet that is editable by all the teachers in the school, so that an email goes out to them, and then to every teacher who has a student in in-school suspension that day, and then they add work into this spreadsheet based on whatever their subject is. And so I always have work very easily onto me. And if you don't have, if your classroom isn't one-to-one, if your school isn't one-to-one, meaning every kid has a laptop, which is that's how our campuses are. That's how a lot of campuses are going. Then you can just have a printer in the room, so they can still send you assignments that way. And then you can just print out the hard copies to give to the students. So that's step one for infrastructure. And then after that, you implement structure. So like I said before, there's a way, rule and a procedure for how we do everything. There's, do we line up by number, the number that's above our desk? How do we go to the bathroom? When are our breaks? How do we go to lunch? What are the rules? That's a big one. The rules are posted up very large in the room. And in my room, there are actually 3 places, big posters in 3 places. And make sure that has gone over and everybody understands the rules and procedures. And then from there, I would say refine your program until you can get it to the point where it is, it's hitting all 3 things. It is, functioning as an intervention for behavior. It is, getting them, they're not losing instruction at minimum, and preferably they're getting caught up and maybe even closing some gaps. And then third, you want to have some social emotional learning, restorative practices going on in there, depending on your group size.
Yeah, to me sounds like a dream, right? If you can do those 3 things in ISS, it's like, wow, that's what ISS should be.
It is so doable. And it is, like I said, it's a different skill set, which is why I think people haven't really gotten into it yet. But it's teachable, it's doable. It's something that can change the climate of the campus fairly quickly versus, you have PBIS implementation, which takes years. You have restorative justice where, it takes years to get all these bonds. And those are good things to shoot for. Those are very good things to shoot for. In fact, I think that this is the base. If you're, trying to implement a PBIS program, you still need discipline that is effective. So you need that tier 2 support, and ISS can be that. But it's doable, and it's a quick turnaround. We can change the campus I can change an ISS in one day, in one workshop. We can show people, provided we have all the stakeholders there. When I do the workshops now, it's not just, well, give me your ISS teachers and we'll train them and then they'll go out. It's a little bit more like, yeah, you give me your ISS teacher, but I also need some of the administrators, or at least one administrator there, so that they can understand what to look for and understand, how to support and also how to hold those folks accountable. Because if you were coming to my room, and nobody has ever done this because, again, the bar is super low, but if you were to come into my in-school suspension room and say, hey, why did this student only get 2 out of his 4 core content subjects done? He only got science and social studies and didn't touch math and ELA. In my opinion, the only 2 right answers to that question are, well, here is my documentation of why I didn't have instructional control of that student because of these behaviors. And, we were working through them and then we got him on track. And then, or it is, well, we had some map testing to get through. And then we had, a big social studies project, and that took a lot of time. Those are the only 2 acceptable answers. Like, we have a reason, we have documentation. If things aren't getting done, I keep documentation as to everything that's happening and why. Now, does anybody ever ask me for that documentation? Really, no, hardly ever, but it's there, and it can be trained and taught to other folks how to do it. And then, and another way it helps you guys out, you admin, is, I document behaviors. So when a child does fail to complete their day of in-school suspension successfully, then what I do is I have a lot of documentation to send to you, and I request respectfully that the child gets another day of in-school suspension. I don't like them going out of school suspension, because then we're just rewarding the behavior. Then you get to go home and play video games instead of successfully complete ISS, right? Which you don't like, or you get to avoid those classes that you don't like that Spanish class you hate or whatever because you got sent home. No, like my only response when you don't successfully complete a day of ISS is just more ISS. So they eventually catch on to, okay, there's no exit strategy. We are intervening in the behavior and we're not giving them a way out.
One thing I'm curious to hear your answer on, Johnathan. If you're in a school that doesn't have the resources to get a full-time ISS room, full-time ISS teacher, and you're kind of piecing together things, like I've seen some schools, it's like, well, we could try and get a substitute teacher today. Well, subs are about as short as teachers right now. There's not usually a lot of subs available, and how many subs really would love that call? Hey, do you want to come run ISS room duty today? But
My
how would
campus
you
just closes it when I'm not there.
yeah, yeah. How would you recommend if schools don't have the full-time ISS resources? How could they still use some of these same ideas and get those results, piecing together an ISS program?
Sure. So my first recommendation, well, first always, if you can get an educator in the room, that's best. If you can't, the second thing I think would be to get a paraprofessional in that room, somebody who's going to stay in that room steady. I mean, you could do a long-term sub in there, but like you said, who wants that job? So we can train a para to implement the how to run the room, implement the structure, the infrastructure, get them going, hopefully get them passionate about what they can do, and then have teachers going in there. I've seen this done on another campus where they have one teacher coming in every period based on subject or content. You could run it that way, but everybody needs to still be bought in, because what happens is when you have multiple people coming in and out the room, then children are trying to figure out, well, what can I get away with this teacher? What can I get away with that teacher? And it becomes a mess and it's very hard to control. So you have a para kind of holding the room down, and leaning on that structure and accountability for each student. And that's what they're there for. And then you have the teachers coming in to, one period per, each teacher gets one class period to come in and either teach that subject or provide one-to-one or small group help. And I think it can be worked successfully that way. But you do still need to have that para in there as the point of control for the room. And the teachers also have to understand that, how to work with that para and allow them to be the one doing the classroom management so that the teacher can get things, can focus on the content. That'd be probably the best way. Or you just have a para in there all day and you train them really well to do the best that they can. If you don't have the option to have the teachers come in there, and that's really just your second best option. I wouldn't recommend a substitute teacher at all, because they're not going to stick with the job most likely.
Yeah. Or what always makes me cringe, um, really a lot of times the ISS room ends up being in the office, and the person who ends up managing the student is the secretary.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, man, that is one of the hardest jobs in education. Constant interruptions. You can't stay focused. And then you want me to manage a kid's behavior? It's
Yeah,
like that usually doesn't go very well. And really, I mean, poor secretaries. It's like, should you have to manage ISS? No.
right. The people who really run the school, we're going to
Yeah.
throw that wrench at them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not their job, and they're in the business of actually making sure that everything on that campus happens the way it's supposed to. Secretaries don't get enough credit. It's a tough job, and yeah, throwing an ISS kid in there with them is just going to make their day. next to impossible. Well, the ISS thing, it's not going to happen, right? They're not going to get an effective intervention. The kid's going to be on their phone watching Marvel movies all day, or on their school issued laptop, just playing around, and you're not going to get anything done. You're not going to get an intervention.
Right. Right.
Unfortunately.
Time served at best. Well, Johnathan, what's the best way for listeners to reach out to you and get in contact?
Yeah, there is a contact form on my website, theartofiss.com. That's theartofiss.com. And they can reach out through the contact page. And I think there's even a little message box on there, a chat box on there, where they can try to type in the chat, and it'll text my phone. I think that's probably the best way if they're interested in reaching out to me and finding out more.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that in the show notes to find the website. And then we always love, as you know, being a listener to the show, we love to end with what can the listeners do this week, Johnathan, to be a more transformative leader like you?
Just start thinking of the in-school suspension room differently. Like, just start to imagine a little bit outside the box what it could be. Start to visualize what it could actually be for your campus, and how that would affect your teachers, how that would affect your job, how that would affect the impact that it could have on your students. Think about all those things, and then possibly reach out to me. That would be a good thing. But it really helps if you can at least start to view it in a different way. And that's why I'm out here kind of preaching about it, because I tell my administrators on other campuses, if you treat the ISS room like a dumping ground, it's probably going to be a dumping ground, right? You have to start viewing it as, no, this is a behavior support. This is our only tier 2 intervention, because out of school suspension doesn't benefit anyone, really. So, start taking it seriously, because we're looking for that solution. We need that solution. Our teachers need that solution. Our kids need that solution. And start figuring out a way to make that happen. And of course, if you want to reach out to me, get my book, whatever, start doing those things, because you can have a pretty quick impact on your campus just by turning your ISS room into more of a learning center, intervention center, than just a dumping ground.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Johnathan. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing your passion for ISS with the listeners.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.